In the heart of the forest, the nightmare awaits. The invitation to hell. It was a cold and silent night when Lucas, Carla, Miguel, and Sarah decided to enter the Black Forest, a place surrounded by whispered legends among the town's residents. They said that whoever ventured beyond certain boundaries never returned, or, if they did, they were never the same. But for this group, with their unshakable convictions and insatiable thirst for thrill, it seemed like just another tale to keep the curious at bay. To them, the Black Forest was merely a mystery waiting to be unraveled. "Come on, it's just a story to scare people," said Lucas with a defiant smile, leading the group with his characteristic arrogance. He prided himself on being the fearless one. "If anyone's going to scare us here, it's me." But as they left the town behind and ventured into the forest darkness, something changed. The air grew thicker, as if nature itself was closing in on them. The silence of the forest felt oppressive, and the smell of damp earth mixed with something more nauseating, like decay, made their skin crawl. Yet, the most unsettling thing wasn't the scent or the sound of dry leaves crunching beneath their feet. It was the unshakable feeling that they were not alone. "I don't know. Something feels off," Carla murmured, a growing weight pressing on her chest. "It's like this place is watching us." Lucas laughed. "That's just fear talking, Carla. Look around. It's a forest. No wild animal is going to eat us." They chuckled nervously, but their steps slowed as the darkness seemed to envelop every tree, every bush, as though the forest was closing in on them. Before they knew it, they were lost, unaware of how far they'd strayed from the path. The twisted, gnarled trees seemed to whisper among themselves, and a sense of panic began to creep in, especially when they spotted, through the mist, a distant figure. A hooded silhouette stood still, watching them. When they tried to approach, it vanished without a trace. "What was that?" Miguel asked, his voice trembling. Lucas, unwilling to show fear, shrugged it off. "Nothing. Probably just someone from the forest. Let's keep going." But the path grew stranger. The trees seemed to shift positions, their shadows deeper, denser, as if creating a labyrinth. Then, just when they thought the forest couldn't get any more terrifying, they stumbled upon a cabin. An old, decrepit cabin with broken wooden planks creaking in the wind. The kind of house no one would dare to enter, yet it drew them in. As they approached, the door burst open with a loud bang, as if they had been expected. "This isn't good," Sarah said tensely. "I don't like this." Before anyone could protest, Lucas was already inside, dragging the others along. "Come on, this will be fun." Inside, the stench was unbearable, a pungent, acrid smell of decay. Candles flickered on a table, illuminating strange symbols covering the walls. They seemed ancient, moving as the flames danced. But the most bizarre thing was the mirror in the center of the room, covered by a black curtain. Almost unconsciously, Carla pulled the curtain away. What she saw froze the blood in her veins. The mirror didn't reflect them. Instead, it showed a hooded figure with hollow, penetrating eyes, a presence that seemed to be watching them. That's when everything fell apart. A low, whispering laughter filled the air, sending chills down their spines. A red glow began emanating from the mirror, spreading across the room like a suffocating fog. Before they could react, a shadow began forming in the mirror, a shadow stretching outward like an invisible hand reaching for them. The door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The labyrinth of darkness. Panic gripped them as the cabin walls seemed to shift, closing in as if the forest was claiming everything inside. Carla's breaths came fast and shallow as she desperately tried to force the door open, but it was unyielding, as though bound to something far greater and inexplicable. The mirror now glowed with unbearable intensity, its shadowy figure inching closer. "This can't be real," Miguel murmured, his voice cracking. Then, the mirror did something that almost broke their sanity. It smiled. But it wasn't a human smile. It was a grotesque distortion, a caricature of a grin with razor-sharp teeth. The figure slowly raised a hand, pointing at each of them in turn, as if selecting its prey. "Don't look at it!" Sarah screamed, her voice lost in the rising chaos. The mirror seemed to have a hypnotic pull, compelling them to stare despite their terror. When Carla tried to back away, an invisible force dragged her closer to the mirror. She screamed, struggling against the pull, but it was futile. The mirror felt like a gateway to another reality, one where they were nothing but prey. Then suddenly everything stopped. The mirror went dark, its light extinguished. They found themselves back in the cabin, but something was different. The silence was suffocating, the air thick and distorted as though time itself had unraveled. Sarah was gone. No trace of her remained, as if she had never existed. She had been erased, the shadow that haunts them. When they left the cabin, they were no longer in the forest. The landscape was warped, unrecognizable. A dense fog blanketed the ground, and the trees had transformed into skeletal forms stretching toward the sky like clawing hands. It felt as though they had been pulled into another realm, one where time and space no longer held meaning. "Where are we?" Carla whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "This can't be real." Lucas stood in stunned silence, unable to speak. He knew they were trapped in a nightmare, but he couldn't find a way out. There were no paths, no signs of life. Only the sound of the fog moving, whispering like it was alive, and the predatory gaze of the distorted trees around them. Something moved within the fog, a shadow. At first, it was just a distant figure, but it grew closer, slowly, inexorably. When it finally revealed itself, they saw the face of their tormentor. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something far older, something forgotten by the earth itself. Its face was a mask of terror, grotesquely deformed and frozen in eternal agony. "You are in my domain now," the shadow said in a distorted voice, a whisper that cut through the air. "And there is no escape." The touch of death. Panic had completely taken over the group's hearts. Carla, Miguel, and Lucas were paralyzed by the thick fog surrounding them, as the forest seemed like an endless nightmare. There were no familiar trees, no sounds from the outside world, only a deadly silence swallowing them deeper with every step. It was as if they were wandering through an infinite labyrinth, where time made no sense, and every step dragged them further into darkness. The sound of the wind was now distorted, as if something were manipulating it. The feeling of being watched was almost tangible. Something was following them. Something not human. Something born from the forest's very essence, from the deep shadows stretching over the ground. Lucas tried to light a flashlight, but the beam flickered before vanishing completely, plunging them into utter darkness. They were now in the grip of the unknown, in a place without rules, where death seemed to lurk around every corner. "What is that?" Miguel whispered, his eyes wide with terror. His voice shook as much as his trembling hands. He looked around, but there was no visible path anymore. The trees, now monstrous, appeared to move, twisting into grotesque shapes that defied logic. He tried to run, but the ground seemed to give way beneath his feet, as if the very earth were alive, pulling him down. Carla, on the other hand, felt a strange pressure in her chest. It was as though the air was being sucked out of her lungs, leaving her gasping and powerless. She tried to call for Lucas, but her voice was lost in the echoing void, absorbed by the ominous silence. It was as if the universe around her had disappeared, leaving only darkness. Fear gripped her body and mind, offering no escape. Then, a figure appeared in the distance. It was a shadow, but not an ordinary one. It moved erratically, yet with an almost supernatural fluidity, as if unconcerned by the laws of physics. As it drew closer, the air around them grew icy, chilling them to their bones. The shadow came nearer and nearer until its eyes began to glow, a fiery red light, like the flames of hell. "What do you want from us?" Carla screamed, her voice breaking. She knew something terrible was about to happen, but had no idea what it was. The shadow advanced, its red eyes locked onto each of them, as if passing judgment. Then, with an abrupt motion, it raised its hand, pointing directly at Lucas. A muffled scream escaped his throat as the shadow touched him, his skin dissolving, his flesh melting like wax. He tried to cry out, but his mouth closed, silenced by the entity's mere presence. "You no longer have control, Lucas. Your end has come," the shadow whispered, its voice a chilling buzz slicing through the air. Its form began to dissipate, leaving only a trail of darkness. Before the others could react, Lucas was completely gone, as if he never existed. Nothing remained of him but a haunting memory. Carla and Miguel stood frozen, paralyzed by the horrifying sight of what they'd just witnessed. It was a death that defied human understanding, something beyond nature, beyond comprehension. What remained for them now? They were alone, lost in a place where reality seemed to unravel. "We can't stay here," Miguel said, his voice low and trembling with fear. He was beginning to realize there was no escape. The forest, the shadows, it all seemed like a trap from the very beginning. Lucas's death was no accident. It was a message. And now it was their turn. They began to run, aimlessly, driven only by instinct. But the forest wouldn't let them go. The trees bent toward them, like giant hands trying to snatch them. Every step seemed to pull them deeper, closer to the darkness that watched them. The air grew heavier, almost unbearable. And just when they thought they'd found a way out, the ground opened beneath their feet, swallowing them into an endless abyss. As they fell, Miguel looked at Carla with fear-filled eyes, but something seemed to stir in the depths below. He couldn't tell if it was a vision or a desperate illusion of the mind, but the feeling of being watched never left them. They were being hunted, not by the forest, but by something older, something incomprehensible. The touch of truth. When the abyss engulfed them, time seemed to stop. They fell into total darkness. A darkness not just physical, but also mental. It felt as though their very souls were being dragged to a place where pain and suffering had no end. They couldn't see, couldn't hear, but they could feel. And what they felt was the weight of something far greater, far older, something that should never have been awakened. When they finally landed, the impact was muted, as if the ground were too soft, as if the very space around them had molded itself to receive them. They were in a different place, a place where the laws of physics seemed irrelevant. The air was warm, stifling, and the constant sounds of movement in the shadows made it clear they were being watched by something that would never let them go. Suddenly, a figure appeared before them. It wasn't a shadow, but a presence. A tall figure cloaked in darkness, with glowing red eyes burning with an unearthly intensity. When it spoke, its voice wasn't heard with their ears, but felt deep within their souls. "You were never meant to be here. The forest called you, and now you are part of it." Carla and Miguel's fear deepened. They were being consumed by something larger, something they couldn't understand. What was this figure? What did it want? Was it death awaiting them, or something worse? They tried to run, but their legs felt heavy, as though the air itself was pulling them down. Every attempt to escape dragged them further into the darkness, deeper into what should never have been disturbed. Worst of all, they didn't know if they were fleeing from death or running toward it. The figure slowly approached, its red eyes fixed on them. When it reached Carla, it extended a hand and touched her forehead with a chilling coldness. The world around them began to dissolve, and Carla felt as though her very mind was being torn apart, as if reality itself was being ripped from her. "What are we?" she whispered, the question slipping from her lips in a desperate plea. The fear had transformed into pure anguish. The figure didn't answer, but its eyes burned even brighter, and everything Carla and Miguel knew was obliterated, as if it had never existed. The space around them began to collapse, and they found themselves once again in the depths of the forest. But this time, something was different. There was no escape. They were trapped, eternally, in a place where death wasn't a release but an endless cycle of torment. And now, what remained for them? What could possibly happen next? Were they doomed to live in the nightmare the forest had become? Or was something darker still waiting, silently, in the shadows? The question lingered in the air, with every step they took, like an invisible shadow.